So with that said, I did a bunch of stuff over sabbatical. One of the things, though, our family has gotten into is kayaking, which we do when we go to New Hampshire to visit my in-laws every summer. And so we just decided, well, we should do that down here and get kayaks. So over the last several months, we got kayaks. Except for my youngest son, all my other 3 kids kayak. And so we all have separate kayaks. We love it. And so we just kind of like got started in terms of Florida. I'm used to like the lakes in New Hampshire. I haven't really kayaked much here. I grew up in Florida though. And so gators are not a thing. I mean, I used to swim on the Alafaya River, which now, no way I'd do that, but back in the day. But you just like take free. In fact, I was thinking about this. Like we used to go to summer camp and there was a massive lake full of gators. And then they would put up like rope with little red buoys as if the gators were going to see the stop sign and not go in. And they would just let us loose to swim in these, gator infested waters. It was absolutely crazy. So anyway, we just got started with this and I decided, well, we live really close to the Medard Park Lake, if you know where that's at. Some of you do. And so I hear some of the groans from some of you already. I was like, we'll go down there and just kind of test out these kayaks. And so we got down there, got the kayaks in the water. And I was like, there's nobody else on the water except for us. It's a pretty big lake. And growing up in Florida, you take it for granted. Again, gator's not that big a deal. I never paid attention to gator mating season and when that goes down and how feral those things are. And so we get in there and I've got all my kids and you know how, if you take kids anywhere, they're in a kayak, but they also have snacks. And so they're throwing snacks around and eating. And all of a sudden there's more gators than I've ever seen in my entire, like Happy Gilmore sized gators everywhere. For those of you who are over 40 and watch Happy Gilmore, they're everywhere. And so you would like go through the little marsh and there'd be beady eyes all over you. Several times I had to stop our kind of caravan of kids because there's like a 6-foot gator. I just had to let him pass as he's eyeing me, I'm pretty sure. And so the whole thing was unbelievably precarious, but you got to keep it together as a dad because if I panic, they panic. But 15, 20 minutes into this, I'm like, this is not, like, we got to get out of here. So I'm just like in the best non-panicky voice possible. I'm like, we're going to do single file line now behind dad in the canoes and head straight to the shore. But it was crazy. Anyway, after we were done, I told Nicole, well, maybe we go back in the fall. And she's like, we're never going back there as long as we live. That was so terrifying. So we made it. It's fine. Now, if you're judging me, get in line, because my wife posted this on social media, and you would not believe the number of people that came out of the woodworks to tell us how stupid we are from all over the country. I've heard people in Michigan, and so anyway, but we made it back alive. My point in all of that is in mundane things of life, even though I wouldn't say that as a mundane thing. We could have been eaten. But you look back on certain decisions you make and you have no idea in the moment, but those decisions become defining moments for us in our kayaking journeys. That was a defining moment. There's other really important things in regard to our life, financially or relationally or emotionally, spiritually, some of the stuff in terms of relational conflict we have. And you make certain decisions, right? And you don't know in the moment the weight of the decisions. And it's only when you look back. This is the difficult thing about life and decisions. And you think, well, I wish I had, or I wish I hadn't. In some cases, on the positive side, I'm glad I did, or I'm glad I didn't. There's others we wish we could go back and we could redecide certain things, but we almost never know what hangs in the balance in the moment. It's why I think with decisions, one of the most important questions we can ask, and it's a question we never really think of, because when we think of decisions, we think of the decision. We don't think of the broader context. But one of the most important questions you can ask around significant decisions is this question right here that you've heard me talk about before. What story do you want to tell? Like, what story do you want to tell? In this season that I'm walking through right now that maybe is incredibly difficult, in the financial stuff that I'm dealing with, in the relational thing, in the semester of school that I'm trying to get through, in the business transaction. One of the things that we don't think of often is the decisions that you're making around those areas that in some cases are really big deals. Eventually, those really big deals and those decisions are going to be reduced to a story. Like one day it's just going to be a story you tell, but the story that you tell that's made up of those decisions, it has the potential to influence large segments of your life. And so when this thing that you are contemplating or deciding, or the decisions that you're making right now, parenting or marriage or career or education or whatever, when it's just a story down the road, and it will be, what story do you want to tell? Because every decision ultimately is accumulating to write a story. And the good news is you get to decide. Like you and I, we write our stories one decision at a time. Like every decision at some level becomes a permanent part of our stories because there's an outcome, there's consequence. I mean, whatever it is, you were asked to lie to a client and you got to figure out what to do, and your job may be on the line, or then you met this guy and then there's a ... of what you do next in that context, or then that thing that you're wrestling with. Do I say yes? Do I say no? And you potentially know that the ramifications could be a big deal. But every decision is writing a story, and when there's nothing left but a story to tell, what story ultimately do you want to tell? Like on the other side of the lost job, and then there's the story of what you do next. You're in a thing right now where there's an attraction, but you're married and they're married, and you think of it as a decision, but it's more than that. It's a story, and it could, ultimately involve a story of shuttling kids around and a relationship that's broken up. I mean, on the extreme side, every decision ultimately is telling some kind of story. And here's what I know about a lot of us. Like we want to be able to live our lives where yes, things are going to go off the rails. We're going to make bad decisions. There's going to be stuff that we're not proud of. But overall, you ultimately want to live a life where you decide in such a way that you tell a story where you don't have to skip bunches of your story for your kids or your grandkids, or edit it out. And they're like, well, what happened in the 80s? And they're like, don't worry about it. Like you want to be able to tell your entire story. But here's what makes this really difficult. Because with difficult decisions or big decisions, we don't think in terms of stories. We get distracted by the pressures of the moment. Like when there's things you have to decide, whether it's a deadline, it's a diagnosis, and you're trying to figure out what to do next. It's, do I marry them or do I just leave? You've got a quota. If you don't meet the quota, you might get fired. And in that moment, this is just human nature. You're drawn to think about the immediate rather than think about the ultimate. And there's so much emotion around. There's so much weight around it. I mean, all of us have been there. And here's the thing with decision making, real quick. There with decisions that really matter to us, there's almost never any neutral decision making environments. Like they're always wrought with emotion. And in fact, I'll speak for me, but I think I'll speak for some of you. Some of your greatest regrets, maybe all of them, happened when you made decisions that were surrounded by a lot of emotion. Like there was emotional appeal to whatever you were trying to decide that ultimately led you in the wrong direction. In fact, psychologists call it focalism. That literally, you'll call it our appetites. When our appetites or our emotions or our desires engage decisions, we lose our mind. I mean, all of us have a story. Like there's a thing where you want it, it feels right, that thing is drawing you. Like, I don't know, 30% doesn't seem like that big of an interest rate. It's like whatever, you just have to have it. And you lose your mind in the process of deciding because there's so much emotion around the decision. So in my notes, I put this, an emotionally charged, which is every significant decision-making environment. In emotionally charged decision-making environments, we think in terms of options. We don't think in terms of stories. And can I just tell you this little tip that I'm trying to learn the hard way and learning the hard way. When something is significant in terms of its emotional appeal, that is not a green light. That's more of a yellow light or a red light, because for so many of us, again, some of our worst decisions was when something we wanted so bad, we were willing to override some of our common sense and forget about the story that we wanted to tell in this next season of our life in order to get it. So when you find something with strong emotional appeal, may not be wrong, but I'm just telling you, that is not an invitation to go green light, pedal to the metal. That is an invitation to slow down, to pause, take a yellow light, and really think in a broader context of the story that you want to tell in this next season of your life. Probably the best example of this is a guy by the name of Joseph in the Old Testament. And Joseph's life displays the importance and significance of this question. About 1800 BC, he comes onto the stage. He's about 17 years old. He's from a dysfunctional family, which you'll see why in a minute. He's at the time the youngest brother. His brothers get jealous of him. There's this whole thing with the father that just was off the rails. They get so jealous of Joseph, the youngest brother at the time, that they decide that they're going to initially kill him, and then they have some kind of mercy. They're like, well, we're not going to kill him. Let's sell him. And they take their youngest, you have family issues, but this is another level. They take their youngest brother and they decide to sell him. And Joseph, this is where the story is so relatable. Joseph ends up in a position where it is no win. There is no good option. There is no way forward. And none of it is Joseph's fault. And so eventually his brothers sell him into slavery. They end up having to make up an elaborate story. And this is just a side note real quick. They end up becoming liars for life, at least 2/3 of their life, where they have to carry this thing that we find out later eats them alive. And whatever they gained in the process was not worth what they had to carry, the weight that they had to carry. Eventually they sell him. Joseph goes up on the auction block and he gets bought. And this ancient, narrative, he gets bought by this guy by the name of Potiphar, taken away to a foreign land. And Joseph has the first massive crossroads in his life where he has a decision to make. And any other human being in those situations, you're like, I think I would pack it in. If you have to go be a slave somewhere, you should just do the minimum amount of work, have a bad attitude, forget it, it's over. And yet Joseph decides, this is extraordinary. In the midst of those circumstances, that he's gonna go all in and do everything that he can to the best of his ability, despite what's happened to him. And so he does. And he decides on a better story. And by the way, that's an incredible story. Just the whole, family of origin is, a pretty lively story. But he talks about getting sold into slavery 2 different times ultimately. And yet he doesn't play the victim. And he decides, despite what has happened to him, he's going to write a different kind of story over his life. And again, no fault of his own. And this is where it intersects with our life, because there's a lot of stuff that we've done on our own, decisions we've made, dysfunction we've accumulated. And then there's the feeling of you're dealing with stuff because of somebody else. Like somebody else is hijacking your story because of their selfishness. You don't need to raise your hand. Like where you get in certain seasons and you're like, I didn't even choose this. I didn't even make the bad decision. I didn't even go. Your bad decisions are writing part of my story in a direction that I don't want to go. And that's exactly where Joseph was. In this place where others had made terrible decisions. So he's at the place to go, why try, why care? And yet Joseph went all in. And despite what was done to him, somehow Joseph had the awareness of mind to go, I get the opportunity to decide how I'm going to respond and write a different story. And then his story intersects with someone else's story, Potiphar's wife. And no fault of his own, Joseph ends up in another terrible situation. He gets into Potiphar's household. He ends up rising through the ranks, has a career promotion, becomes the lead of this whole estate, which was a massive, massive career move in the ancient world. And so Joseph moves from a nobody sold into slavery to a position he never could have imagined. And just when he gets to the pinnacle in his late 20s, along comes Potiphar's wife. And once again, Joseph is put in a no-win situation that he didn't choose. And here's what the writer of Genesis says, of Joseph's story. Here's where he picks it up. Now, Joseph, this will make sense in a second, was well-built and what? Handsome. He's, Men's Health cover model. He's jacked. He's whatever. And here's why it's relevant. Verse 7, after a while, his master's wife, so this is Potiphar's wife, took notice of Joseph for those reasons and said, without a hint of subtlety, come to bed with me. Because she's in the ancient world. Her husband, high rank. This is just what you do. I get what I want. Come to bed with me. And immediately Joseph is put in a no-win situation. She insists on an affair. He's about 19 by now. 0 good options. In the ancient world, basically, either way, Joseph thinks, I die. And honestly, give credit. Most 19-year-old kids are like, either way, it's not going to work out for me. But Joseph decides to write a different kind of story. And so he gets propositioned by Potiphar's wife. And somehow Joseph is able to pull back, and this is so powerful. He begins to rehearse his story out loud as the context for his response. I've talked about this so many times before, but I think one of the most meaningful things that you can do, and I don't think a lot of people honestly do this. We have some kind of vague understanding in our mind, but to literally determine not what you want to achieve. At the end of your life, I hate to tell you this, nobody's really going to care too much. Some stuff somebody may care about, but not generally. Who you want to become, how you want to live your life. Joseph lived this way, and what you will find throughout the narratives is he would rehearse his story over and over again because he understood what God had done and where he wanted to go. And so in those moments where the emotion was so thick and it was so easy to be seduced by a bad decision, he would rehearse out loud, this is where I am and this is where I want to get. And it gave the context for his response. You should know crystal clear. I've told you this before, it sounds weird. You should ahead of time, write the obituary for your life to go, if I live in the direction that I want to, not what do I want to achieve, who do I want to become that becomes the context for your responses in every season? So this is what Joseph does. And so basically, this is my paraphrase. You can go read it for yourself. Mrs. Potiphar, I don't know what he called her. Mrs. Potiphar, I came to this land as a slave. This is my story. And I had no rights, and I had no future. I mean, nobody experiences what I've had happen. And your husband purchased me, and I did my best to serve him and serve you. And then next slide. Through hard work and God's help, I've gained the trust of your husband, and he has put me in charge of the entire household. Like, this is what's happened in my life. It is a trajectory, as bad as it started, that I never could have imagined to be in the place that I am now. And then Joseph says, and I quote, verse 8, with me in charge, he told her, my master does not concern himself with anything in the house. Everything he owns, he has entrusted to my care. No one is greater in this house than I am, which says so much about Joseph's integrity and character and what he did as a Hebrew slave boy. My master has withheld nothing from me, except you, because, by the way, you are his wife. And basically the implication is, I just told you my story, but Mrs. Potiphar, or whatever he called her, you have a story too. Like, this is your story. And do you want to add to your story? And then you had an affair with a Hebrew slave boy, and probably ultimately are going to oversee my execution, which is generally how this goes down, because there is a story that you are writing. And somehow Joseph is able to push back and recognize in this moment when there is so much emotion and he has no good options. He's able to recognize what's happened in his life, which was unimaginable. The fact that he won the trust of this guy that had purchased him. And the fact that even though it didn't look like it at certain times, God had been with him through all of that. And so Joseph asked the question, how then, in light of all of that, in light of my story, because this isn't about a decision, this is about a story I'm writing. How could I do such a wicked thing and sin against who? Now, if we were real, I wish I could spend 5 weeks on these narratives. But there's certain points in Joseph's life, if you read the story, we're like, sin against God. God hasn't shown up for you in a while. And yet over and over again, Joseph had this unshakable confidence, even when he was at the peak of his career and then the bottom drops out, that God was with him all along. And in light of that, he's going, why would I add this terrible decision to a story that is honestly, up into this point, unimaginable? Like, I got 2 stories that I can tell, because eventually this is going to be a 2-sentence story. Your husband hired me and gave me an unimaginable opportunity that most people don't get in this ancient world who come from my background. And I earned his trust, and I stewarded his trust, and I honored God. Or I can tell a story of, your husband gave me the opportunity of a lifetime. I betrayed his trust. I had an affair with his wife. Like, what story do I want to tell about my life for this next season? And here's the thing, like, for all of us and where it intersects with us, as big and as complicated as the decision is right now, and we all have those. I mean, like, nobody told you how big and the complicated the decisions would just keep getting. But there is so much emotion, and you got to figure, and sometimes you're not even sure. It's not necessarily an ethical thing. It's not a moral, immoral thing. It's just, I don't know what's best. But as big and as complicated as the financial decision is, the business decision, whether you're going to go into business with them, should you marry them and you're scared out of your mind? Should you date them? Should I get help for this thing? You're resisting getting into some kind of therapy and counseling. You know, something else is off the rails that you're just ignoring. Whatever the decision is that is so fraught with emotion and weight and energy, eventually that complicated decision will be a 2-sentence story that you tell. So whatever decision you're in the middle of, when there is nothing left but a story to tell, as emotion-filled as it is, what story do you want to tell? And as you probably know, Joseph decided that he was going to write and tell a good story. And so he says to Potiphar's wife, I can't sleep with you. In verse 10, and though she spoke to Joseph day after day, he refused to go to bed with her or even be with her. And then this is when it gets a little too real. Joseph, once again, does the right thing and doesn't get rewarded for it. Joseph does exactly what he should do in this moment. He does what is right, and it doesn't turn out right. I talked to somebody after the first service, and they're talking about this whole thing with this business deal, and they have over and over again done the right thing, and every time they've done the right thing, they've paid for it in a negative way. He's like, I feel like I'm right in that space. All of us have at some point along the way. He does absolutely what's right and doesn't get rewarded again. Ultimately, he gets falsely accused of rape. He gets thrown into prison or a dungeon. And again, if you don't know the rest of the story, I'm kind of envious of you because it's so spectacular. Joseph has no idea what's ahead. You know what's maybe coming in the coming chapters. Joseph didn't. So imagine this story arc of the most dysfunctional family imaginable, sold into slavery, put on the auction block. Then I rise to prominence and get a career position I never could have imagined. And then after that, I go right back to where I was. I'm put in prison. I'm falsely accused. You would think you'd start to maybe wonder about God, like, where are you? Are you kidding me, allowing this to happen again? And yet there Joseph is in that scenario. And he decided to tell a different story, even though he had to have been thinking in terms of what his dreams and vision was for the future. It's over for me. Like the dreams I had for what I wanted, my story is over. And yet, if you know Joseph's story was anything but over. And here's what some of you need to hear, because the weight of what you've done or what somebody else did to you or somebody who's hijacking your story and you're not sure how to respond, it is so easy to get in that place to think that it's over or I should just give up or in light of what's done, I'll just live as a victim. Joseph's story wasn't over. Your story is not over. And it is so easy to get into a chapter of your life and think that that chapter is the entire story. And yet the chapter is just a chapter. And Joseph somehow is able to keep his mind to recognize my response has a lot to say about how this next chapter and ultimately this story ends. If you're familiar with Joseph's story, he decided well and he earns the favor of a prison warden. Which you don't even really want a personal relationship with a prison warden, but he ends up in prison for several years, gets to know the prison warden, works his way up again, which says a ton about Joseph, and he ends up running the entire place. Several years go by, and Pharaoh, who's the most powerful man in the world, he's also brutal, hears that this guy Joseph can interpret dreams, and so dreams were a big deal in the ancient world, brought Joseph before him, and Joseph is before the most powerful man in the world about 2 years after being put in the dungeon, and Pharaoh's like, Joseph, I hear that you can interpret dreams. And then this is a confidence that only comes by being through what Joseph has come through, where like, it doesn't matter what you do to me. I have already watched God work, whether I'm at the peak or whether I'm sitting in a dungeon. And so Pharaoh says to Joseph, I hear you can interpret dreams. And Joseph looks back at Pharaoh and says, nope, I can't. And all of Pharaoh's advisors, because they know what happened, they just drag guys out by the leg and you never see them again. They're like, you can't say that to Pharaoh. And then Joseph takes a pause and says, I can't interpret dreams. But the Hebrew God that I serve, he can. And all of Pharaoh's advisors are like, Pharaoh thinks he's a God. You can't say that either. Because Pharaoh thought he was a God, and yet Joseph's confidence was unbelievable. And so he begins to interpret this dream as God gave him the interpretation. There's going to be 7 years of over-the-top grain harvest. And then there's going to be 7 years of famine. And then he tells Pharaoh what is going to happen, and then he does the unthinkable. I mean, already there's so much tension in the room because of Joseph's boldness and the way he talked to Pharaoh. Then he does the unthinkable, and he gives Pharaoh unsolicited advice. And he says to Pharaoh, hey, I know you know me for 5 minutes. Here's what you need to do, most powerful man in the world. You should hire somebody that you trust to oversee this whole thing, or otherwise it's not going to go well for you. And everybody holds their breath thinking that Joseph is going to be no more. And Pharaoh smiles and he says, verse 38, can we find anyone like this man, Joseph, one in whom the Spirit of God is? And then Pharaoh said to Joseph, since God has made all of this known to you, there is no one so discerning and wise as you, and that discernment and wisdom came from a lot of pain. Verse 40, I love this. This is Pharaoh and all of his advisors. You shall be in charge of my palace, and all my people are to submit to your orders. I mean, I've only known you for 15 minutes, but it just feels like you should be in charge of my entire empire for the next 14 years. And again, all of Pharaoh's advisors are like, we've been working for you for 20 years and you hire a 20-something-year-old kid that you've known for 15 minutes? And yet Pharaoh puts him a hold of the whole thing, only with respect to the throne will I be greater than you. And 2 years after the dungeon experience, there is Joseph, and he's standing before Pharaoh, and he's given the opportunity of a lifetime through family dysfunction that we cannot even imagine, and through being falsely accused in ways that most of us can't even imagine. And I'm sure through part of that season, wondering where God was at. And then he stands there in that place. And here's what I find most extraordinary. I mean, Joseph wasn't perfect. We don't have the whole story. But he stands there before Pharaoh, having so many opportunities to play the victim. And he has a story from start to finish that he is not ashamed to tell. Because he wrote a good story every single time, not because he was in control of the story, but even when others hijacked it, his response wrote a different story for what he wanted in the next season of his life, and eventually becomes prime minister of Egypt. And a famine devastates, and Joseph did his job well, and he opens the federal grain silos, and everyone in Egypt comes, including Joseph's brothers. And they don't recognize him because now he's 30 years old, and he doesn't look the same. He's just a kid when they sold him. But Joseph recognizes them, and we'll talk about it next week. And eventually, Joseph reveals himself to his brothers, and his brothers are terrified. I mean, imagine this. Imagine anybody you've ever wanted to get back at who's like hurt you in a real deep way. This is the ultimate story. Like Joseph has been hurt beyond imagination by his punk brothers who sold him into slavery. And now fast forward, he is second in command and his brothers are bowing down before him. How many imaginary scenarios have you had with people that like owe you an apology to be in Joseph's position? He has all of the power. And yet this is kind of the point of the story that we'll look at more last week, is that Joseph, despite where he came from and despite his family of origin, despite what had been done to him, Joseph was nothing like his brothers. And Joseph was nothing like his family of origin. And Joseph was not victimized by what was done to him because he refused to react and he refused to be like the people that he didn't like, and he decided against the gravitational pull of bitterness when it would have been so easy to be bitter. And here's the thing that Joseph understood, that like we have to try so hard to grasp a hold of, regardless of what your family of origin looks like, regardless of how crazy your parents were, just regardless of how much victimization have happened, and it's a big deal. And I'm sure if we heard your story, we would cry tears. Joseph recognized, a man who had all of those things in his story, that he had the freedom to decide how he responded. And in that response, he wrote a different story for his life. And honestly, I would never say any of this. But what gives credibility is Joseph's story and what he went through. He decided a story worth telling, which is why we're still telling his story. He didn't seek revenge. And I think there's a very specific reason he didn't seek revenge, because of what was modeled for him in this little subtle part of the text that we're going to look at next week. He brought his brothers into his land, he gave them a home, and he did not get back. And we're still telling Joseph's story because of that. So here's what I want to end with. What's your story so far? What's your story arc in terms of your life, but what's your story arc in terms of like certain areas where like there's some gaps in regard to maybe integrity or character? What's the story arc in that relationship? What's the story arc with your kids so far? Like what's the story so far in terms of what you know you need to prioritize, the help you need to get, the secret that you're holding on to, like all the stuff that just we struggle with, the human nature. Like what's your story so far? And then the question to ask that we often don't ask, what story? What story do I want to tell in the future? Like, what story do I want to be told about me? Because like Joseph, like his brothers, you're writing a story one decision at a time. Every decision becomes a permanent part. Write a good story. When the relationship thing and the semester thing and the should I circumvent that because everybody does it in my industry thing, when it's nothing but a couple sentence story, what story do you want to tell? Write a good story. Decide a good story. And if you haven't decided a good one up into this point, would you just listen to me for a second? It is so easy to give in to the discouragement of this is how it's always going to be. This is how my family was. This is how I was raised. This is how my dad was. This is how it's been for 3 generations. Or here's what was done to me. And if you knew the arc of what's happened and the breaks that I haven't got and the things that have been done to me, and we can end up telling that story for the rest of our life. But regardless of how bad it is, or an area where you don't like the story that you have told so far, would you just listen to me for a second? That chapter is just a chapter. It is not the whole story. And your response in this next season, or maybe this next decision, some of you are right on the verge of it right now, has maybe everything to do with how this chapter and how this story ends. I mean, this all throughout the New Testament. The greatest example of this is Jesus' disciples. We talk about the disciples' stories with such romanticism, with heroic faith, with these unbelievable people who monuments have been made to them. 2/3 of their life were about betrayal and not getting it right and walking away and abandoning God. And yet eventually they were able to recognize on the other side of the resurrection that those chapters were just chapters. They weren't the entire story. And we're telling their story because they decided to write a different story moving forward. And you have the option, despite what has been done to you, despite where you were born, despite what somebody else has done to you, to decide with freedom that I can respond in a different way and I can write a different kind of story, exactly as Joseph did. So every time you're faced with any kind of decision, right now on the verge of maybe something that you're contemplating, decide a story in that relationship, with that financial decision, with whether I'm going to get help, whether I'm going to tell them, whether I'm going to move in their direction to reconcile. It's not just a decision, it's a story. What story do I want to tell? This is a question not just for a moment, but through an entire season. You lost a job, and now there's a ... and you got to figure out what goes in the blank. There's a divorce, and it's nasty, and it's generally with divorce and relational conflict, everybody wants to tell their story, and you can spend an entire season of your life just telling your story. Or you can decide to write a different story in response. It's a semester that's gone off the rails. It's a dating life that is not good or non-existent. It's parenting that is so difficult. And yet one of the things I'm thinking all the time in my parenting is like my decisions are writing a story, and my kids at some level are going to live out of, they're going to respond to, they're going to take courage from, or they're going to have to try to overcome the story that I write. And so every time you're faced with a decision of any magnitude, when this thing with so much emotion, so much weight, so much energy, when it's nothing more than a story that you tell, what kind of story do you want to tell? Next best step for a lot of you is our 3-week group on Genesis starting Thursday, July 17th. These are great ways to kind of interact with the scriptures more, which a lot of us like are hungry for that and need that. But equally as important, for some of you, like this is amazing. But it can't stop here. This is an incredible place to get connection, to get to know other people in community. So if you don't have that yet, you want to feel a part of this church, these types of things are great on-ramps for that on July the 17th. But would you guys stand with me all over the house? And I want to pray for all of us, for some of us who are right where I talked about this morning. Pray with me. Jesus, thank you so much for your church. Thank you so much that we can gather. Thank you so much that it's ridiculous how ancient stories are so unbelievable, relevant, and alive to what we're walking through right now. So I just pray for the individual who has, like all of us at some point, accumulated some really bad decisions and some chapters that they wish they could redo and redecide. And God, I pray that you would meet them not with the evil of shame and condemnation that you came to obliterate forever, but you'd meet them with your grace and your mercy, that this chapter does not have to be the final story. I pray that, God, you would encourage those who are in a really difficult place right now where they've tried to do what is right and they've had other people hijack their story because of their selfishness. And it is so easy to say in that place, it's so easy to play the victim. It's so easy to shake our fist at God, and you understand all of that. But God, give us the wisdom in this moment to submit ourselves to you and recognize that you have given us the power through Christ and through his resurrection to even in our response, decide to write a different story that you can use. And I just thank you for the promise that whether we've written part of the story that we regret or somebody else in essence wrote part of it for us, that you are a God who has the power to take and restore and reconcile and rewrite and use every single one of those things for a better future. And we're praying all of that in Jesus' incredible name. Amen.